Last Thursday, Joe Rogan hosted Robert Kennedy Jr., founder of Children's Health Defense and presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket, on his podcast. They had a 3 hour conversation, and where I come from, that's what you call trying to talk somebody's leg off. The conversation went very well. They covered any number of topics in those 3 hours. And as you might expect, given that it's Robert Kennedy Jr., they touched on the subject of vaccines. Now, as I said, the conversation went very well. It's what happened afterwards that set off a controversy over the weekend and has now led to a situation where a scientist has been offered upwards of $1.5 million to debate Robert Kennedy Jr. on Joe Rogan's podcast, except he won't do it. What's all this about? Hang on, folks. We're going to get into all this in just 1 second. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. Now, as I said, last Thursday, Robert Kennedy Jr. is on Joe Rogan's podcast. They have a 3 hour conversation. It's all very nice. It's amicable. No one has any problems. A good, healthy discussion on any number of topics, and one of them was vaccines. Podcast ends. Everything's fine. And then we get to the weekend, and that is when everything starts to get really interesting. Enter one Dr. Peter Hotez. Now, if you don't know who Dr. Peter Hotez is, let me show you his background. Give me 1 second here. This is from Wikipedia. Peter J. Hotez is an American scientist, pediatrician, and advocate in the fields of global health, vaccinology, and neglected tropical disease control. He serves as a founding dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine, professor of pediatrics and molecular virology and microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine, where he is also director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development and Texas Children's Hospital's Endowed Chair in Tropical Pediatrics, and University Professor of Biology at Baylor College of Medicine. Hotez served previously as president of the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, as the founding editor-in-chief of PLOS Neglected Tropical Diseases. He is also the co-director of Parasites Without Borders, a global non-for-profit organization with a focus on those suffering from parasitic diseases in subtropical environments. Okay, as you can tell, this gentleman has a certain amount of academic heft. He's got titles. He's got credentials. He's been working in the fields of virology and immunology for quite some number of years. And as you might expect, he and Robert Kennedy do not see eye to eye on much of anything. Now, the podcast was on Thursday. It's a tweet that Hotez put out on Saturday that started this whole kerfuffle going. Now, let me show you exactly what Hotez wrote on his Twitter page. Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation. It's really true, Anna Maryland. It's just awful. And from all the online attacks I'm receiving after this absurd podcast, it's clear many actually believe this nonsense. Now, like I said, as you can imagine, Robert Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Peter Hotez do not agree on much of anything. So apparently Hotez finds out that RFK Jr. was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he took a shot not only at Kennedy, but he took a shot at Rogan. Now, if Rogan were just a complete stranger to Hotez, that'd be one thing. But Dr. Peter Hotez has been on the Joe Rogan podcast at least 2 times I know of, possibly more. They know each other. Now, that's Hotez's tweet. What it sets off next is a reaction from Joe Rogan. Take a look at this. Peter, says Joe Rogan, if you claim what RFK Jr. is saying is, quote, misinformation, I'm offering you $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you're willing to debate him on my show with no time limit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine what that's going to be like. We're talking about the biggest podcast in the world where two titans of their respective positions on the question of vaccines, vaccines for children, efficacy of vaccines, etc., where RFK Jr. and Dr. Peter Hotez can go at it, no time limit, and knowing Rogan probably very little in the way of rules, and just have a conversation. Now, I'm sorry, I don't care which side of that you're on. That, to me, would be amazing. A real, honest-to-God debate. Something that's not being suppressed, something that's not being watered down, just two rams on the mountain colliding. I think it'd be fantastic. Now, that was Rogan's reaction. What it sets off next is a whole series of back and forth between Hotez and Rogan, which finally leads to an upshot. We're going to get to that in a second. Here's an article from Zero Hedge, and they do a wonderful job chronicling this whole thing. Their headline is, quote, "Double-talking vaccine scientist refuses to debate RFK Jr. despite $1.5 million charity pot." So hold on to that number, and I'll explain what's going on here in a minute. Now, we took a look at some of the tweets below. Now, the amazing part about it is, in the response back and forth to each other, RFK sees what's going on, and he says to Peter Hotez, quote, "Peter, let's finally have the respectful, congenial, informative debate that the American people deserve." Now, let me back up and explain something about RFK Jr.'s tweet. Even though these two know of each other and know generally each other's position on these issues, they've never really been eye to eye with each other. Not figuratively, I mean literally. According to RFK Jr., the only time that these guys have ever had a debate was a telephone debate that was moderated by somebody else. It's not like they've ever sat across a stage from each other or across each other in a television studio somewhere. So what Rogan is offering them is a very unique opportunity for both of them. Okay? So that is RFK Jr.'s response to this. Now, I want to show you a little bit more because the longer this goes on, the more you can tell that Joe Rogan's getting irritated about this. Let's go back to this thread. Rogan asks him again, "I'm going to ask you very clearly, are you willing to debate Robert Kennedy Jr. on my podcast?" This keeps going on, and, Hotez is saying, look, I'm not going to give you a yes or no on Twitter, a take it or leave it answer, yada, yada, yada. But what gets even more interesting is the fact that people start upping the ante on this thing. Remember, Rogan offered $100,000. Watch this. This is a tweet from Bill Ackman. "I will add $150,000 to Joe Rogan's wagers, so now $250,000 can go to the charity and the public can hear an open debate on an important topic." By the time Tim Pool gets around to this thing, listen to this. "I'm offering $100,000 into a total pot of $1.52 million in a desperate attempt to get the experts to debunk misinformation. We are begging them to disprove it, and they won't even try." So again, this goes on and on and on. And the way it ends between Rogan and Hotez is that Hotez is basically like, look, I want good relations, I want a cordial relation, yada, yada, yada. Now, where it stands right now, there is an offer of $1.5 million on the table to Dr. Peter Hotez. And basically the deal is this. You come on and debate RFK Jr. on Joe Rogan's podcast, and $1.5 million will go to the charity of your choice. That's a pretty sweet deal. We're not talking about, candy and soda pop money here. $1.5 million does a lot of good to a charity. Doesn't matter who it is. Hotez won't do it. He will not debate RFK Jr. on this topic on Joe Rogan's podcast. Now, here's my take on the whole thing. In the traditions that I come out of, there are only two reasons why you will not debate someone if you hold a particular position. One of them is you don't really believe in the position you're holding, and number two, you don't think you can defend it. Now, as to the first, I have no doubt that Dr. Peter Hotez truly, honestly, and passionately believes in the positions that he holds about the efficacy of vaccines. Okay? that leads me to the second. I just don't think he can defend it, which to me is the amazing part about it. This guy has been in virology and immunology for decades. Okay? He is credentialed up the wazoo. I don't understand why he can't defend this. It's not like he doesn't have access to the data or the science or colleagues or studies and everything else. If he thinks that RFK Jr. is a spreader of misinformation with regard to vaccines and all the issues that surround that, wouldn't you think he'd have a moral and ethical obligation to debate RFK Jr. anytime, any place, anywhere, if for no other reason than to put down what he perceives to be the misinformation that Robert Kennedy Jr. is spreading about this issue? Yet he won't do it. Furthermore, if you really care about the charity in question, whichever that may be for Dr. Hotez, don't you think if for no other reason than trying to get $1.5 million for a charity you care about, you'd go debate RFK Jr.? But he won't do it. Which leads me to one conclusion. He cannot and will not defend that which he believes, and consequently, he should be labeled an intellectual coward. And by the way, if anybody's watching this video and you think that I'm going to back up or back off or give up or recant or apologize for that statement, I have absolutely no intention of doing so. If Dr. Peter Hotez does not debate Robert Kennedy Jr. on some platform somewhere, or in this case, on a podcast, he is an intellectual coward, and everything he tells you, or most things he tells you, let me put it that way, most things he tells you related to immunology and the efficacy of vaccines should be disregarded. If you will not defend that which you believe and that which you claim to advocate for, then you shouldn't be listened to. So my advice to Dr. Peter Hotez is this. Look, you may not like Robert Kennedy Jr. personally. That's fine. That's up to you. But you're being offered the biggest stage in the world from a podcast perspective. To go on and debate somebody that you apparently perceive as the biggest proponent of vaccine misinformation. Go do it. It's not like you haven't been on Joe Rogan's podcast before. You know how Rogan's going to treat you. And from what I've seen, the clips I've seen of your visits with Joe Rogan, Rogan's been very amicable. It's not like he's trying to sandbag you. It's not like he's trying to torpedo you. It's not like he's going to ambush you. He's just going to let you talk. And from everything I've heard from Robert Kennedy Jr., he's like, look, let's have the conversation. He's even said in different places, I am open to having my mind changed. So if you've got the data, if you've got the information, if you've got the studies, if you've got the truth on your side, then go debate Robert Kennedy Jr. on the Joe Rogan podcast. You've got nothing to lose, dude. Unless, of course, you can't do it because your information and your data and your studies and your everything else won't back you up. So yeah, you should do it. Otherwise, you are an intellectual coward. And you will be known as such, and you will be remembered as such. But that's what I think about it. What do you think? Tell you what, as we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors. Number one, if you're not a subscriber to my channel, please do so. Number two, hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when I've got a new video coming out. Number three, please leave a comment below. Number four, give me a thumbs up. And number five, please share the video around. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you next time.